1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. So, welcome everyone to the Biel Chess Festival, I should say the 50th Biel Chess Festival. So this is a jubilee year. It is a really traditional tournament in the chess calendar, and this 50th year, of course, promises to be very special indeed, and we have a very special tournament taking place today, a special rapid play tournament with, well, it's a knockout tournament with 8 players, and we have, I think we can say, a chess legend. The word legend is certainly overused, but today we can use the word chess legend with confidence because we have Anatoly Karpov, the 12th world champion, playing, which is a fantastic honor to have him playing in this rapid play tournament. So it's an 8-player knockout rapid play tournament. The games are already underway. I'll get to the games in a moment, but let me just tell you about the players we have. Well, the pairings are Anatoly Karpov is black against Alexander Morozevich. Fantastic to see Morozevich playing. We have #1 player in the world, women's player in the world, Ho Yifan, is playing black against David Navarra. And we have the Roger Federer of Swiss chess, Yannick Pelletier, playing against Rafael Vaganyan, who, well, he won the Biel interzonal tournament in 1985. Fantastic to see him play. He's a wonderful player. And we have Pentala Harikrishna from India playing against Vlastimil Hort. Vlastimil, I mean, he's won the Biel tournament on 2 occasions, and he's famous in Europe through his appearances on German TV, and well, wonderful guy with fantastic stories and superb chess player. So I think we should get to the games, and I think we should first of all look at Anatoly Karpov's game. So let me just bring that up onto the screen. So we've started a little bit late, and so Alexander Morozevich with white playing against Anatoly Karpov. Morozevich, well, he likes to play older openings, slightly offbeat openings, and he's playing the Scotch, which Karpov knows quite a lot about, having faced it in World Championship matches against Garry Kasparov. And this is the line that Karpov always used to play against Kasparov. And, well, this line goes way back into the 19th century. And already it's a slightly unusual position with the queens blocking in their own bishops. So, you know, that makes life, well, yeah, unusual. Of course, it's a theoretical position. And to me, this looks slightly strange, putting the bishop to a3 and then putting it back on b2. Of course, that knight can't be taken here because of the pin. There are always very strange tactics in this line. So Morozevich just bringing out his king's bishop. Of course, at the moment, he's a pawn down. Well, he recovers it now, and they've gone straight into an endgame, and I think we can catch up with more moves. So it's gone castles queenside and castles queenside. So level material, but, well, an unusual position with black's king on the queen side. This bishop, for the moment, locked in, although we should watch out for the pawn coming to d5 a little bit later on, possibly even that bishop coming back to b7 and c5. A couple of ways to bring that bishop into play. But, well, it's going to be interesting to see how this knight comes into play. But this is quite a big decision for Karpov. How he actually breaks here, whether he goes for d5 or whether he plays with this pawn move c5. And he's having a bit of a think here. If we check out the clock times, let me see, how are the clock times? Let me just get them up. Well, already Morozevich with 5 minutes remaining on the clock. Karpov with 2.5 minutes. I should just mention the time control, which is 10 minutes on the clock at the start of the game, and then for each move, the players get 5 seconds additional time. So I can see that Karpov has just played bishop c5. Well, he's waiting for the moment to see. You know, he might play d5 a little bit later. He doesn't need to fear b4 because that will give the bishop on a6 something to do. And in the meantime, I think it's a very interesting idea because with bishop c5, he's looking to perhaps target the pawn on f2. Let me just give you the format for this knockout tournament. And that is each of these mini matches. So there are 4 mini matches. And the players will play 1 game each. Sorry, they'll play 2 games. So they reverse the colours. So in this first game, Morozevich has white, and then they'll switch the colours. So that one's brewing into an interesting game. We've got more moves. Well, Morozevich did play b4. The bishop went back to d6. An exchange, and then knight d2 and rook e8. So an interesting position. Let's move on and take a look at the game between David Navarre and Ho Yifan. So David Navarre, he's, well, a very exciting player, currently rated, let me see, 2737. 21st in the world, very exciting player. He won the Czech Championship in May. He came equal second in the European individual in June. He lost a rapid match against Ivanchuk in June, 7.5, 4.5. So I wouldn't say rapid chess is his speciality, but still an incredibly strong player. Now let's see what we've got on the board. Perhaps I can just recap very quickly and see how we got there. So Navarre with white. It's a Nimzo Indian main line. Very standard. And now he took on c5. Well, this is not so standard. And I think Navarre is playing quite positionally here. He's not getting involved in any kind of theoretical discussion. So we have typical isolated queen pawn position. And the point of this move, of course, is to establish a nice blockade on the d4 square. And the bishop coming out to this beautiful diagonal. Now, can Yifan generate play? Okay, she's brought the bishop here to come to g6. Now that gets exchanged off, but at least that means that this double pawn actually is quite a nice defensive formation for black, because that g6 pawn covers the crucial f5 square, preventing the knight coming into f5. Well, of course, white is slightly better in this position just because of the isolated queen pawn, but there is pressure here as well. Navarre felt he had to cover the e4 square. I mean, at the moment, I would say this position is roughly level. Oh, we've got some more moves. So it's gone g5, yeah, that pawn can be useful. Now the knight has gone, it's don't need to cover the f5 square. Well, it still looks like a very balanced position, but I'm slightly nervous about Navarre's king position, actually, which is just opened up a little, but looks very balanced to me. Okay, let's move on and look at the game between Yannick Pelletier and Raphael Vaganyan. I'm just going to go from the start very, very quickly. So it's a Catalan and a closed Catalan. Vaganyan, in his chess career, would say was never a great theoretician. He liked to play d4, d5, generally as black. And, well, he's actually a very creative player, but not so much in the opening. In the middle game, he's very creative. And c4. So, central structure is being determined. Now, let's see. It's also an isolated queen pawn here now. Yannick has grabbed a pawn. What has black got for it? At the moment, I don't see a lot. So it looks to me as though Yannick is doing pretty well here. His king is rock solid, very, very safe indeed. Let me just check out the clock times. Let me see. Yannick has just over 2.5 minutes remaining. Vaganyan has just over a minute. So that game is looking very favourable for Yannick. He's just a couple of days ago won the Swiss Championship for the 6th time. So he's on good form. He's also one of the organisers of this tournament, so he's got a lot on his plate, but looking pretty good for him at the moment. Very safe pawn up. Let's see if he can convert that one. Okay, let's move on and look at the game between Pentala Harikrishna and Vlastimil Hort. Pentala Harikrishna, well, after Vichy, he is the best Indian player and a fantastic prospect, very classical player. Let me just check the clock times. Yeah, he has over 2.5 minutes, and Vlastimil Hort is down to his last remaining seconds. And we've got quite a few moves on the board. I won't go from the beginning because things are hotting up with Hort so short a time. Vlastimil Hort, well, he's won the Biel tournament on 2 occasions. Of course, he doesn't play so much anymore, but in his day, an incredibly strong player. Played in several World Championship candidates matches. Very well known in Europe through his appearances on German TV. So let me see. Harikrishna, a pawn up. But this one is not so easy to convert because that bishop is doing a very good job of controlling the knight. And the rook and the queen very active indeed. And black's king is pretty safe as well, just tucked behind those very nice 4 pawns on the king side. Vlastimil Hort, a superb positional player. His strategic understanding was really excellent. And what he's done is he's advanced his isolated a-pawn down the board, and he's trying to create a weakness on the queen side, which he's done very well. And now the rook has swung over here. So it's very hard at the moment for white to advance those pawns. And if it weren't for the time situation, I would say, well, actually, black has pretty decent drawing chances in this position. But if I look at the clock times, well, Vlastimil is down to his final remaining seconds. He's lunged forward on the king side with g5. I think, sorry, let me just come back and see those last few moves. So it's gone rook d7. Well, I think it's a good technique from Harikrishna. Trading off the rooks, that means it'll be easier to try and get to black's king. And then he'll be able to maybe use his queen to dislodge black's queen. We've got more moves. So it went g5, exchanged, and king takes. So that's the position on the board. No, we've got some more moves as well. And Hort has advanced his kingside pawn. So trying to squeeze the king, but now the knight is going to come to d3. But then black might have a chance to hit out on the king side. But, okay, looking good for Harikrishna Aron. We have 2 results. We have a result in the game between Yannick Pelletier and Raphael Vaganyan. So it's gone, if I can just catch up with the moves. It's all happened very quickly. E6. Now that looks like a mighty fine move from Yannick. Aha, after pawn takes, if pawn takes, I guess he wanted to play queen f4. That's a great idea. Coming into h6, that's a beautiful move. So it went f6, queen f4 anyway, and the queen came in. g4. So now black's king is getting broken up, king position getting broken up, and well, here I'm guessing that, I don't know, he might have resigned, he might have lost on time, but here that's another pawn in the bag for Yannick. So, well, a very convincing display. And we have another result in Morozevich against Karpov. We left the position around about here. Let's just catch up. So how did Morozevich do this? It looks very smooth at the moment. C5. Okay, trying to keep that bishop bottled in, although it can come out to a6. The moment it looks okay for Karpov. What happened? Something disastrous happened. So it's got to watch out for knight b5 check. Remember, there's a pin there. So the king came to b6, rook c3, knight g4, hitting the pawn, rook f3, rook e7, and that looks like the final move of the game. So I'm guessing that Karpov actually lost on time in this position. Well, it's still a very unclear position, actually. You know, black has a very nice active rook. But I guess Morozevich was just too quick. Morozevich is a real specialist in blitz and rapid chess. In fact, when I looked on my database, I could see no recorded tournament games from him this year in classical chess. But he specializes in playing blitz and rapid tournaments. So there we go. And we have results all over the place. Navarra Ho-Ifan, that's the final position. That looks absolutely crushing. That pawn is about to fall, and that would be checkmate. Let me just catch up and see how we got there. We left the position around about here. And I thought this position was roughly level, but g4. Okay, that some ways solidifies white's king position. Okay, takes control over these squares. Okay, now white is better, because I think in the endgame, the king actually looks very good on f2. And the rook is free to come in on the open file. Yeah, now white is clearly better. This looks very nasty. And, okay. White won this one. And let me see, the last one, we have Hare Krishna against Hort, which we left around about here. And now that knight comes into play. You've got to watch f2. The queen and the knight are too strong, much too strong. Yeah. Here, Vlastimil Hort resigned. If king g5, then if I'm not mistaken, then queen g7 looks to me like checkmate. So there we go. That's our the first game of the first round in this knockout tournament is over. So quick recap. Morozevich defeated Karpov. Navarra defeated Ho-Ifan. Peltier defeated Vaganyan. And Hare Krishna defeated Hort. So white won on all boards. They play their second game. Well, I'm not quite sure when they play their second game. There'll be a break of some minutes, but we will hopefully announce that on the site. So watch out for that. But I think we're going to take a little break in transmission. So do join us again for game 2 of round 1 of this very special knockout event in the 50th anniversary Biel Chess Festival. See you soon. start. So welcome back to the Biel Chess Festival, and we have a very special knockout tournament taking place today. And we're still in round one, but we now have game two. So just a quick recap of what happened in the first game. David Navarra defeated Ho Yifan. Alexander Morozevich defeated Anatoly Karpov. Yannick Pelletier defeated Rafael Vaganyan. And Pentara Harikrishna defeated Vlastimil Hort. So now they play a second game. If the scores are level after these two games, if the players that lost hit back, then they will play one Armageddon game of, well, 5 minutes against 4, with black having 4 minutes and black has draw odds. So the players who lost have to hit back. Let's look at the first one. So we have Ho Yifan with white, the #1 women's player in the world. And her rating at the moment, 2666. She's just played in a couple of the FIDE Grand Prix tournaments. Geneva, just that finished, well, not very long ago. Didn't do that well. She had a pretty rough time. I think, she still is getting used to the elite level. But in April, May, when she played in the Moscow Grand Prix tournament, she actually fared much better. So she needs to defeat David Navarra from the Czech Republic in order to force an Armageddon game. So it's a Berlin, and Yifan has kept the tension with d3. So all the pieces on the board, no Berlin endgame, and we have, a tense situation. We have more moves. a6. Bishop has come back to a4. So absolutely typical Spanish position. So we're probably going to see this knight come around perhaps to g3. Perhaps after a bishop exchange, the knight may come to e3. Very typical position, but, well, neither side really out of their comfort zone so far. So that one's very tense. I should mention that the time control, again, is 10 minutes for all the moves, but the players do get 5 seconds added to their clock each time they make a move. Okay, let's switch to Anatoly Karpov against Alexander Morozevich. So fantastic to have Anatoly Karpov, the 12th world champion, playing in the tournament. This, as I said, this is a very special year. It's the 50th anniversary of the Biel Chess Festival, special Jubilee year. First one was in 1968. And Karpov has won the Biel Grandmaster tournament on 3 occasions. So let's see. He needs to beat Morozevich, and Alexander Morozevich, well, very, very exciting player, and doesn't play that much classical chess anymore. So it's great to have him playing in the rapid play, but he does specialize in rapid play and blitz tournaments. And now it's gone queen a5 and bishop takes f6. So as is typical for Karpov, he wants to avoid complications, so he suddenly looks and sees knight e4 coming, so doesn't want his bishop to be attacked, and knight takes f6. So how is Karpov going to deal with this? Is he going to play g3? Is he going to play e3? Which one of these is he going to go for? Where does he want that bishop? He's gone for e3. And we'll hope to perhaps try to control this move c5. That's the break that Morozevich wants to make. And you can see he's played a6, defending the b5 pawns. That means that he can try and break with c5. and get his bishop into play. So that's going to be the crucial break in this position, advancing that c-pawn. Okay, very early stages of that game. Let's move on to Rafael Vaganian against Yannick Peltier. Well, this is a mad game. It's a Trompovsky. And Yannick has allowed the pawn to come to e4, but now, after h6, that means, of course, if the bishop retreats, you can play g5 and you can grab that pawn. So black grabs the two bishops, but white has space and a lead in development. And now things are starting to kick off. Knight b5. Now this is tricky. Obviously attacking the pawn on c7. Now the question is, why didn't Yannick go all the way back with his queen? He could have played queen d8 in this position. I wonder what he was concerned about. Was he worried about some kind of d5 or queen c3? In any case, he didn't do that. He's played king d8, so his king is rather displaced. I mean, maybe he simply wants to keep his queen on this active square, but very unusual. Now knight h3, so I can tell you from personal experience, Rafael Vaganian is a very dangerous player with the initiative. I remember playing in a blitz team tournament in Germany where things started out very well in our game. I had nice positional advantage, I was ahead on the clock, and then suddenly he thought for a little bit, found a very interesting sacrifice, piece sacrifice, and then bam, bam, bam. Fantastic initiative, and he swept me off the board. Very dangerous player. Vaganian, of course, he's 65 years old. When I was looking up games on the database today, I saw the first game on the database of Vaganian's games was a game he played against Anatoly Karpov. Incredible. So Karpov, I think, is 67 years old, and Vaganian 65 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a very unclear position on the board. I mean, that would concern me if I had black here. The king position would concern me. And white, has the possibility to move this bishop out, castle kingside, bring the rook to the f file. Reminds me of a kind of weird kind of king's gambit, actually. I think I would feel very satisfied if I had the white pieces here. h5 from Yannick, so he wants to bring this bishop into play. He's fighting back. He's going to use that dark squared bishop that doesn't have an opponent. Very interesting game. Of course, this h-pawn could be loose as well. After bishop e2. Now, after bishop e2, bishop h6. And then this pin could be interesting. Castles, e5. Knight d5 takes. Tricky. Okay, that pin could be annoying. So Vaganian has to deal with that one. Okay, let's move on and look at the last game. So Vlastimil Hort against Pentala Hari Krishna. Vlastimil Hort, well, an absolute class act, tremendous player. He's won the Biel chess tournament twice. He's playing the so-called Jobava variation with bishop f4 and knight c3. So he's taken on Bardo Jobava's opening, and Pentala playing in a very traditional way. And, well, this is the most sound way, basically stopping any kind of nonsense with knight b5, and also means he can still bring his bishop out. So he hasn't played the pawn to e6. So a3. And now bishop d3, I guess. Yup. And bishop e4 keeps a bit more tension in the position. Knight e2, yeah. This is the problem with the Jobava variation, that actually that knight on c3, once a6 comes, doesn't actually look so clever and has to spin around the board, spin around the board here to actually get into a decent position. But in spinning, it means that this knight can be taken, so Hare Krishna takes the opportunity to damage the kingside pawns. But at least we have a double-edged position on the board. Remember, Hort is in a must-win situation in order to force the Armageddon tiebreak. And castles queenside. Great. So Vlastimil is really going for it, but of course, in putting his king on this side of the board, he has to be very careful for some kind of break here. And we have more moves. We leap ahead. Well, in fact, after castles queenside, knight a5. And Hort is taking this off, so that's a bit of a concession. But that knight was too strong. Now, Hare Krishna could trade off lots of pieces. He could also bring the knight back to f6, in which case the knight could come back here. But I think Vlasti is looking after this big trade. His queen will be more active, and then he can maybe look to play on the g file. Let's see what's happened. It's gone. Aha. He exchanged on f4 and played his queen back to c7. So instead of trading, which, as I said, would have brought the queen into a nice position here on the king side, then instead Hare Krishna has put the queen back. So that means after this trade, for example, then the queen is nicely placed in the center of the board, controls squares on king side and queen side. And, well, it means he could always bring the queen, his king to safety on the queen side instead of having to go king side. To be honest, I can't imagine there'd be so much danger on this side of the board, but just keeping things under control. Now that's an interesting move. Queen g5, so that prevents castling on the queen side, hits the pawn on g7, so kind of forcing, I don't know about forcing, but pushing black into a decision of where he puts his king. So an interesting move. And Hare doesn't want to go on the king side. After queen g5, it's gone g6. So presumably he just wants to push the queen out of the way with queen e7. And if this pawn runs up the board, I guess we can block with h5. Still under control for black. Let's see what we've got. Rook d3. Okay, so Vlasti is looking to maybe come in here. So he's trying to stir things up here. Interesting play from Hort. And at some point we might see this pawn come all the way to f5 to give itself up to open lines. Okay, let's switch back to Ho Yifan against David Navarra. We left the position here, and let's just recap on what we've got. So the knights doing their usual dance over to the king side, where they're looking at these outposts. And as the e-pawn is now protected by the knight, then it's possible to advance in the center. c5, bit of pressure. a4. And now Yifan has been thinking for a little bit. She can choose whether to take on b5, remember there's a pin there, or whether she simply recaptures in the center. Well, in any case, white is a little bit better in this position. The usual slight space advantage. So that's kind of interesting. Let's just check the clock times. Just a quick recap that players start with 10 minutes. They get 5 seconds added per move, so 10 minutes each. And I can see Ifan has 5 minutes remaining. Navarra just under 3 minutes, so nice little time edge there. So Ifan in a must-win situation. And let's go to Karpov against Morozevich. And Karpov in a must-win situation as well. We left the game here. And Morozevich has broken with c5. Now, what has White got in compensation for giving up the two bishops? Black has two beautiful bishops. Well, what White has is a lead in development, so he has activity. So can Karpov make something of this? Those knights are flying around. I wonder how many players would flash in with a sacrifice there. Probably not good enough, because after the queen comes to e6, I can see the queen will nudge back to b6. Should be okay. Rook c1. Okay, taking the file. That's interesting. Morozevich has absolutely no fear. Not worried about this. I'm sure he believes that queen b6 will be good enough. So Karpov has just put the knight back. And it looks to me as though the danger has passed in this position for Morozevich, as the queen has had to come all the way back. Position looks very even. Well, I would even, to be honest, I would favor black here with the two bishops. Because this rook is, at the moment, still on its starting square in the corner, whereas black has control of the c-file. I mean, of course, the position is roughly level, but I think Morozevich has it under control. And if we check the clock times, Karpov is just under 3 minutes, Morozevich just under 4 minutes. Should be fine. Okay, let's move to Vaganyan against Peltier. So we've got quite a few developments. After h5, it's gone g3. Okay, so he was worried about this bishop coming to h6. h4 threatens something here, bishop h3. So prevents something nasty happening on the h-file. That hits the pawn here. Now, I was saying earlier, I didn't particularly like black's king in the middle of the board, but Yannick, with this move, manages to trade queens. Now, he gives up a piece, but of course, he recovers it straight away with this pawn fork. But still, a very unclear position on the board. We got some more moves. It went knight c5, bishop takes, rook takes. Well, I think white is still better here, because the rook has seized the open file. White still has these pawns, these nice pawns in the middle of the board. Could e4 become weak, this e4 pawn? Depends how quickly black can get a rook to the e-file. Now the problem is, if the king comes out, then it's in a pin, so e5 would be possible. Well, it seems to me that Vaganyan should be better in this position, actually. Well, Yannick has played king d7. So now I'm looking at the moves of rook g7 or possibly e5 straight away. Tricky. Very tricky indeed. I feel that Vaganyan should be better here. I mean, I wonder, there's also knight d5 to consider at some point as well. So maybe the move e5. Then a rook may come to the g-file. Yeah, maybe that's not so bad. Raphael Vaganyan was for many years actually a trainer with Karpov. I mean, they're here together in the same tournament, so it's interesting to see them play. He's such a talented player. Of course, getting on in years, doesn't play so often, but still extremely dangerous. Okay, he's played for the initiative. Now that's interesting. He put his knight on d5 and the rook has come here. So playing the knight to d5 means that, of course, black was unable to challenge on the g file because the knight would fork on f6. So that's pretty good. Seems to me that Vaganyan is better here. And the knight, let's see, after rook f8, f5, and the knight went back to d8. But time could be the issue here. Vaganyan very slow in the first game that he lost, and he's in a must-win situation, but I like the way he's played. Now, Yannick has gone back with the knight. That could spin back to this fantastic square, e5. The question is, can Vaganyan somehow create problems? I wonder if he wants to just break with e5 before that knight gets there. Can he give up a pawn? So giving up a pawn, and then can he find a nice home for the knight? Well, it's interesting. Instead of e5, he's played c4 and played c5. So he's weakening that pawn on d6, and Yannick did indeed bring the knight into e5. Yannick just needs a draw to progress to the next round in this knockout tournament. So that knight on e5 will give him hope. I wonder if it might be possible to perhaps spin around and trade off that knight. I don't know. Tricky situation. Simply king b2. He's waiting for the moment. You can see Karpov wandering around there. Let's just go to his board and see what happened. Ah, it's a draw. Okay, we have a result there. So let me just recap on those moves very quickly. We left it round about here. Karpov has just played queen e2. And, well, Morozevich only needing a draw, very professionally keeping the position very solid, very tight. And, well, if anyone is better here, then, of course, it's black. In this endgame, the bishops are wonderful. And, well, he's given one up in order to damage the pawns, but yeah, in this position with black in the better position, Morozevich offered a draw from a position of strength, which Karpov has taken. So we have our first match is over. So Alexander Morozevich wins 1.5/2, and Karpov is out. Okay, let's go to Vlastimil Hort against Pantala Harikrishna. So Hort looks to me like, well, he's managed to at least open the position. Let me just come back to where we left the game, which was after rook d3. And, of course, black has the better pawn structure here, but with the king in the middle, it's not so easy for Harikrishna. f4, now that's an interesting move. So presumably after queen takes, he would crash in with rook takes e6. Now that looks pretty interesting. Checking the king, hitting both rooks, very nice indeed. So Harikrishna ducked to the side with king f8. Of course, there's a pin there as well. The rook would be taken, so king f8. f5, very dynamic. opening things up and bringing the rook to e5. So Hort playing very nicely. Now, it's not clear to me that White has the advantage here, but Hort is striving to get something in the position, to get an unbalanced position. Brilliant endgame player in his heyday. So at the moment, we have 4 against 2. On this side, the king coming to the middle. Okay, now what happens on rook takes? Let's see, let's catch up. We have some more moves. So the game went king c1, rook e2. And I can see that now Pantala Harikrishna has it completely under control. Yeah, it went wrong. And now, well, he just made a draw. It's a moot point whether he could avoid a draw, because on the next turn, one of these rooks is going to take on f7. So White is okay there. But that draw secures the match win for Pantala Harikrishna. So he goes through, won that mini-match 1.5-half. So Harikrishna will meet in the next round the winner of the match between Pelletier and Vaganyan. And we have a decision in Ifan against Navarra. Well, okay. We're going into an Armageddon tiebreak because Ifan has won the game. Let's just see how it happened. So, Ifan has managed to claim a very nice space advantage, very typical in the Spanish. And then both knights coming to the outpost. But that knight, yeah, this one is looking more dangerous than the other one. Of course, this can't be taken because of the rook would be en prise. Knight g5, very interesting. So if that knight is taken, then there's a big fork on f7, hitting queen and king. So perhaps that's the move that Navarra missed in his calculations, because suddenly this looks tremendous for White. And a very nice move again. If rook takes knight, then once again we have a fork, this time on the e6 square, not on f7. Therefore, queen d7. And knight takes again. Very nice. So this is what happened in the game. Wow. If the queen goes back, then White is going to take here, and then there's a knight fork on e6. So how does this change things? Navarra wants to give a check here, presumably. Yes, check. And he reaches an endgame. So after the dust has cleared, I can see that, well, the knight is threatened, and also this is threatened. Okay, Navarra has escaped further material loss, but he is just a pawn down. And, well, this is a fantastic position for White. I would say a completely winning position for White with the rook on the 7th. And now 2 rooks on the 7th, that's too much. And I think the king is safe. Yep, and here Navarra resigned. So that mini-match is 1-1. So they will play an Armageddon game, a tie-break game. 5 minutes on the clock for White, 4 minutes for Black, and Black has draw odds. Let's go to Pelletier against Vaganyan, which I can see has turned around. It all happened very, very quickly. And Yannick has won that game. So Yannick Pelletier, the great champion and favourite here in Biel. He was born in Biel, grew up in Biel, played in the Biel tournament since he was a kid. The Roger Federer of Swiss chess. And he has won the game, has defeated Rafael Vaganyan 2-0, so he goes through. Let's just have a quick recap how it happened. The moment, well, I thought Vaganyan was better. But let's see how it happened. Yeah, in this position, well, Vaganyan is a pawn up. but presumably there was a problem with time at the moment. Suddenly the h-pawn has dropped. This is looking past and fast. And this looks too much. Yeah, the rook goes behind the pawn, presumably. Oh, well. Here, white must have lost on time, because if I were white, I would make a queen. And suddenly, this one isn't so clear. So in fact, Vaganyan was doing very well, but it looks like he just lost on time. So the younger man seems to have won through. I can see Karpov is helping out with the analysis there. With his old friend Raphael. I remember when they used to play in London tournaments in the early 1980s, and Vaganyan would often be there as well with Karpov, and they'd be working as a team together. Vaganyan is a great specialist in the Queen's Gambit declined and the Catalan. Of course, these were openings that Karpov excelled in as well. So there we go. I think we need to give a quick recap of exactly what's happened. So 3 matches have been decided. Pantala Hari Krishna drew his game against Hort, so he goes through with 1.5-1/2. Yannick Pelletier, as we've just seen, defeated Rafael Vaganyan 2-0. And Alexander Morozevich drew against Anatoly Karpov. So Morozevich goes through 1.5-1/2. And we have one match still undecided as Ho Yifan defeated David Navarre. So that's 1-1, and they will go into an Armageddon tiebreak, which I imagine will happen fairly quickly. But I think we're going to take a short break until then. I think you'll be able to see the scores. There we are. We can see the scores there. Fantastic. So just one game to go. Tie break between David Navarre and Ho Yifan. So do join us in a few minutes when we'll be looking at that game. So we're back on, and we have the tie-break game in the match between David Navarra and Hou Yifan. They drew their match one apiece, and now they play one Armageddon game, which means that the player with the white pieces, David Navarra, I think they drew for lots, has white. He has 5 minutes. Hou Yifan has black. She has 4 minutes, only 4 minutes, but it means if she makes a draw, then she will go through. So she has draw odds. And very interesting opening. It's one of my favorite tricky openings with black, the so-called English defense. It's not really a defense, it's a real counter-punching opening. So you invite white forward and then you hit out from the sides. A3 is a very prudent move, just controlling the b4 square, because that bishop pin can be very annoying. F5, so there is a problem with this, that it allows d5, and that can be upsetting for the black structure, and we leap on a few moves. Well, this is actually a very theoretical position, unbelievably. I think Yifan has obviously made a decision to get into a complex position to try and kind of overload David, because he's a real calculator. He loves to calculate. The problem is, in blitz chess, it's often a huge mistake to calculate too much. So a very non-standard position, but this is great for us. We've got a great fight on our hands. David Navarra played a rapid match against Vasily Ivanchuk earlier in the year and was defeated by 7.5, 4.5. In fact, just about a month or so ago. So I don't think this is his forte. And I think Yifan has a good chance to come through this one, but we're about to find out in these final few minutes of the first round. So bishop e5, I like that move. Just putting some pressure here. And let me just check out the clock times. So 3.5 minutes for Navarra, just over 2.5 minutes for Yifan, but well, the time's beginning to even up. So generally, I think it's probably a good idea to get black in these kind of situations, because if you have draw odds, that is a massive advantage. So it's gone after bishop e5. Quick recap: taking on f5, taking on c3. Now that means that this knight can come to the c5 square, and then the bishop can pop out on a6 to hit the c4 pawn, and we have more moves. But white has the two bishops, so in this position it's gone bishop e3, knight e4, so that bishop is a wonderful piece. So white, particularly looking at this move f5, will perhaps try and exploit some weaknesses on the king side. You know, whose king is safer here? Well, I think in the long term, it looks to me as though white's king is definitely safer. So let's see. Well, it's gone. Now, he didn't play bishop d4. He took on e4 and played queen g4. So he is going for it on the king side. He has to play for a win. So that bishop will come to d4, hitting the pawn on g7. And this knight is preparing to spin its way into the game. Got another move, d6. Okay, d6 pawn has moved, but look at the e6 square. That knight may be able to spin into that weak e6 square. So at the moment, I have to say, I think I favour white in this position. Knight g5, whoop, we leapt forward. It went queen e6 check, and knight g5 threatening knight f7. So Yifan in some trouble already, and these pieces at the moment on the queen side just look completely redundant. All the action is taking place on the king side. And there we go. It's gone queen e8 and bishop d4. Navarra not afraid of an endgame, because after the exchange, the knight will come into that wonderful e6 square. And then g7 is hit. The rook is hit. Looks great so far, and I'm also looking at that pawn on e4. Maybe that rook could just slide over and take on e4. We've got some more moves. It's gone. Bishop c8. Queen h6. Well, that's a bit of a surprise. Threatening two mates in one on one move. Queen g6 is forced, but that means that the kingside pawns are damaged. Rook e1, hitting the e-pawn. Bishop f5, defending an h3. Very nice from white. So he just wants to play g4, push the bishop out of the way, and take on e4. More moves. They're coming thick and fast. Bishop d7. So Navarra now a pawn up, and that's taken. So looks like a very sound extra pawn, because that knight is definitely superior to the bishop. That knight has a lovely square to land on g5. This bishop doesn't look so good. I'm just wondering how the rook is going to come into play. Rook e1. There we go. Rook e1. So, quick recap. Navarra in a must-win situation, and he's a pawn up. These pawns don't look so good on the king side. Navarra definitely in control here. He's played knight g5. And if the rooks are traded, then that will give him two wonderful pawns in the middle of the board. That pawn's slightly weak, but even if that pawn were lost, white still has the advantage. So Ifan in some trouble. Now, clock times. This is crucial. David Navarra has 1 minute and 10 seconds left. Ifan is under 30 seconds. Got some more moves. It's gone c6, and the pawn has come to d6. So dangerous pass pawn, but okay, I can understand why Ifan wanted to try and break up those pawns, but I don't think it's particularly improved the situation. I'm looking at this next move. Rook e7 could be nasty. b5. So the women's number one wants to try and create some play on the queen side. She's pushed forward with b5 and rook e7. Up. We've leapt forward a few moves. Knight e4. Knight c5. The rook has come down to e7. Hitting the bishop. That looks like the end of the game to me. That bishop, I think, is lost. We've got lots more moves. It went... Whoop, got the wrong game on the board. After rook e7, it went rook d1 check. b4, but in this position, well, Ifan has resigned because the bishop is lost. If the bishop goes back, then simply rook c8. So it all happened in a bit of a flurry, but I think a very convincing game from David Navarra. So he wins that tiebreak and goes through into the next round. You can see them there chatting at the board. David is a very modest guy. He's a real gentleman. He goes through. So, quick recap of the round one results, the quarterfinals. So, as we've just seen, David Navarra has defeated Ho Ifan, and he will play Alexander Morozevich in the next round. Then we have Yannick Pelletier, who defeated Rafael Vaganyan, and he will play Pentala Harikrishna in the next round. So we're going to have a few minutes break while the players just take a bit of a chill after the action, and do join us for the semi-finals fairly soon. We'll try and post when it'll actually take place on the site, but bear with us because we're trying to get the information as well. I should say that there's there's an open rapid play tournament taking place here at the same time, and I think they're waiting for those games to end before they set off the other games in the main knockout tournament. So anyway, do join us in a few minutes. Thanks very much. So welcome back to our coverage of the ACCENTUS Rapid tournament here in Biel, the Biel Chess Festival. This rapid tournament is just taking place today, and then tomorrow we'll of course have the main Grandmaster event, which lasts over a couple of weeks. But anyway, back today. We have the semi-finals, and we have David Navarra playing against Alexander Morozevich. And we have Yannick Pelletier against Pentala Harikrishna. So let's take a look at the games so far. So just to recap, they play 2 games in each mini-match, and the time control is 10 minutes for all the moves, plus they get 5 seconds added per move made. Probably, I think we could say the favourites have come through the first round. So now we have David Navarra, who's, well, either rated #1, but he's playing against Alexander Morozevich, and this is a really intriguing game, intriguing matchup, because I think David Navarra, a brilliant calculator, very interesting player, playing against Alexander Morozevich, who hardly plays any classical chess these days, but is a real specialist in blitz and rapid. And, well, I remember the first time I saw Alexander Morozevich in London, where he won the Lloyds Bank tournament with some outrageous score of Lloyds Bank Open, which was it 9.5 out of 10 or 8.5 out of 9? And then he played in the PCA rapid tournaments as well, some of them. And I remember him, for example, crushing Anand at that time, a real surprise, with the King's Gambit no less. So a very adventurous player, a very interesting player. And David is having a think in this position. No, we got some more moves. I think the transmission is just lagging a little bit. So it went Knight F3, exchange on D5. And this is a well-known position, actually. Normally a check happens, and you can play King F1, but Bishop E3 is normal. Let's see. Ah, yeah. It's actually a very well-known variation after check. Bishop E3. Sacking the exchange on this early is known. It's been seen before. There's a much older variation that goes like this. Bishop H6, and then castles. And black has control over E5, but white has pressure on the F file. That's an interesting variation. But Morozevich has just given up the exchange straight away. Very interesting. So that means he has this huge dart-squared bishop. Has been seen before. I think it's a very good strategy for a rapid play game where, in order to try and make something of the extra exchange, white has to play very precisely. Of course, with limited time, not so easy. So I think a good choice of variation for Morozevich. And, well, we're guaranteed an interesting fight there. Let's just switch over very quickly to the game between Pentala Harikrishna and Yannick Pelletier. So Harikrishna, after Anand, India's strongest player, and I really like the way Hari plays. He's a very classical player, but a fantastic fighter. Very positional. So this variation of the French Tarrasch that Yannick has played is, well, it goes back to World Championship matches between, I'm pretty sure, Botvinnik and Bronstein played this variation. But this particular line is very popular with Russian players in the late 80s and 90s. And although white has pretty good control over D4, in fact, this constellation of knights and an isolated pawn on D5 give black a real foothold in the center. The knight comes to F5. It looks incredibly dangerous, but in fact that bishop is well known. It simply drops back to D8 and sometimes bounces out to B6. And the great thing is that the moment the bishop on D8 protects the knight on f6. So actually, very difficult for white to make progress on the king side. The queen and the knight look great, but they can't actually achieve too much at the moment. So, well, I think obviously white still a little bit more active than black. Perhaps rook d1 coming. But this is a well-known position and certainly not too bad for black at all. Let's go back to Navarra against Morozevich. Not too much has happened there. Castles and knight d7. I think Morozevich was absolutely right not to accept that pawn, because in this kind of situation the open file makes it much easier for white to gain activity for his rooks, possibly queen as well. And don't forget that d-pawn could be a little bit weak too. So I think Morozevich absolutely right not to take that pawn. What he is going to try and do is control that e5 square. And we have queen e2 from Navarra, protecting the pawn, but as I said, not so important. But basically it means that he can now, he's connected his rooks, and I'm sure he'll be looking to double rooks on the f-file, play rook f2, switch the rook to f1, and to try and use those rooks. That's the semi-open file. He needs to use his rooks. Clock times. Just a recap that the players have 10 minutes at the start of the game, 5 seconds added each time they make a move. At the moment, Navarra is down to 6 minutes already. Morozevich, 9 minutes on the clock. Hare Krishna, 8 minutes. 7 minutes for Peltier. But let's go back to the game between Navarra and Morozevich. So Morozevich, it's his turn to think a little bit. He's got to decide whether he comes in straight away with that knight on e5. Let's just get a bit of colour off the board. Or what else could he do? Let me see. Knight h5, I guess the queen could just nudge across to f2. Nothing too serious there. Knight could go back to e8, and then after knight e5, perhaps you recapture with the bishop. Could also flick in a6 in case he wants to just stop a knight coming in. But no, done something very different. He's played b6. Interesting. So perhaps he's just looking to play the bishop out here and just to bring his rook to e8, and the bishop will cover the b5 square. It's a thought. White has to be better here. He does have an extra exchange, a rook for a bishop. Nevertheless, the dark square control does give black some kind of long-term play, maybe against the king, just long-term security. But I still prefer white because, you know, we can still double on the f-file, for example. But dynamic position. So Navarra's turn to think here. And he's now down to 5 minutes, and he's dropped the bishop back to c2. Now that's interesting. He's played bishop c2, so he's looking to use the fact that b6 has weakened the c6 square and just kind of slide in there. From a4, of course, the bishop looks through to the e8 square. Ideally, that's where black's rook would like to end up. So I think a4 looks like a good square to me. I certainly prefer white. But let's see. Morozevich answers very quickly. Knight h5. Looking to throw the knight into g3, of course. So you could play queen f2 there. I wonder, maybe that's his idea. Maybe he wants to trade here and put the bishop on a6 to hit the c4 pawn. Very importantly, he has played that move quickly. And time, of course, such a huge factor in these games. So 7.5 minutes for Morozevich remaining and 4.5 for Navarro. So already a 3-minute time cushion there. And I mean, if I were to pick a favorite to go through in this round, I would pick Morozevich. Navarro, incredibly talented player, but sometimes I wonder how practical he is. Well, he's shifted his rook away from the f-file. He's played rook fe1. Well, to me, that's a surprise. I would have thought it would be best to keep a presence on the f-file. But clearly he wanted to keep the queen just hitting, protecting the c4 pawn. Let's switch and look at the game between Pantala Harikrishna and Yannick Peltier. So went a5. Knight c5. Could play a4 here, but knight c5 instead. Moving the queen out of danger, and Harikrishna has simply exchanged on e4. So wanting to get rid of one of those knights, maybe he feels that exchanging off the knights will perhaps make it easier for the queen to operate on the king's side. And now rook d1. So this is sharpening up nicely, and one more move, rook e8. Well, one question would be, in this position, I guess, was that possible? Was it possible to take on c2? I would be a little bit concerned about the dark squares in this case. Maybe queen g5, and don't forget there could be something happening here, and a queen h6 as well. So rook e8 played, but those dark squares are looking a bit weak. Certainly this is a more comfortable position for Harikrishna. In terms of rating, of course, Harikrishna is rated much higher than Yannick. He's used to playing in elite tournaments, but Yannick on his day can beat anyone. You might recall not so long ago, about 18 months ago in the European Team Championship in Reykjavik, Yannick defeated, or the European, was it the Club Cup? Well, Yannick defeated Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. Not bad. So Yannick can certainly do it when it counts. So rook d6, but this looks very threatening to me. I don't like the weakness of these dark squares around black's king. So the big question is, what happens on queen takes c2? But these 4 white pieces look so menacing in this position. Bishop d4 is an obvious move. Don't like the look of it. And let's just check the clock times for the moment. Harikrishna still has just over 6.5 minutes remaining. Yannick has 2.5 minutes and counting down. He's still thinking in this position. I wonder whether he needs to push his queen back to c7 or something like this. This is tricky. There are some funny tactics here. I'm also looking at, no, this one doesn't look so good. Bishop c7, rook takes, bishop takes. You can take the knight here. No, it should be good for white. This is a tough position for Yannick, very tough indeed. And he's got the pressure of the clock as well. I can see he's just made a move. I'm just trying to get my board to update. No, he didn't. I don't think he took on c2. No, he played queen c8. Yeah. Attacking the knight on f5. So Hare Krishna to move. He could go in with the knight, checking the king, and then perhaps add to the pressure with bishop d4. This bishop's such a nice piece. I think Yannick desperately wants to play a move like rook a6 to trade off this active rook. What other moves could Hari consider? Knight h6 looks like the obvious move. At the moment, I don't see others. But he's having a good think. Wants to find the follow-up as well. I mean, even positionally, I quite like White's position because this e4 pawn, a bit further advanced, but it allows White's pieces to play around it. So, you know, even a check and, you know, at some point bringing the knight back here. I guess the point is, maybe what he's worried about is that after the check, he does have to watch out for this move bishop c7, pinning rook and queen. So this is still tricky. But somehow the weakness of the dark squares just doesn't look great. Let's have a look. No, he did play knight h6, and after king g7, he did play bishop d4. It looks very, very pleasant for White. And rook a6, I think he had to make that move. After rook a6, of course, he's hoping to trade that active rook off. But I think knight g4 was threatened. Guess he could have considered rook e6. I guess he was worried about the knight coming back here. But Yannick has played rook a6. I guess this knight is a slight concern at the moment. Because after the rooks are traded, then the knight would be en prise. So a few little tactical hitches. They've exchanged rooks on a6. And now he has to, Hare Krishna has to think about that knight. So it has come back to g4. Can't be taken, of course, because the queen takes and there's a pin. The knight is beaten away and comes back to e3. Now, this is what I meant by positionally. I like Hare Krishna's position. He has a very fine positional sense. This knight blockades the pawn on e4 beautifully. And White's pieces can play around that pawn. The bishop in particular looking really good. Sliding down towards the king, and that knight holds the c-pawn, so you know, White is certainly better here with that passed c-pawn. Queen e6 from Yannick. Okay, so he's managed to stabilize on the king side, but positionally on the queen side, he is, of course, a little bit worse. Clock times. Quick update on that. 4 minutes remaining for Pantala Hare Krishna, a minute and a half for Yannick. Not so simple. We should switch over to the game between David Navarra and Alexander Morozevich, because we have had great developments there. We last looked at the position around about here, and let's just catch up with the moves. It's all going on here. The bishop has come to a4, and now black has something to work away on the king side. Well, before that knight came to this amazing square on e5, then the knight is hacked off, and Morozevich gets a pawn back, but he's had to trade queens. So a position that's very dynamically balanced. 2 bishops and a pawn against that rook and knight. Who's better? At the moment, I have to say I slightly prefer black's position. We've got some more moves, because I think it's very difficult for white to make any kind of progress here. You can see that David is simply shuffling around with his rook. Clock times, very important in this kind of situation. David Navarro has just over 2 minutes, Morozevich just over 3. And this is a more pleasant position for black to play than white, because black has a kind of fortress here. White can make no progress. So the only question is whether black can break here. Now, the problem is, if he's going to break on the king side with a move like g4, really, I would say he needs the help of that rook. The bishop might do very well on this diagonal, actually, looking at the e-pawn. The problem is, when the rook shifts over, then it means that the b-pawn will be under fire from the rook on b3. So this is very finely balanced, you know, how you can actually make this break. But I would still prefer to be black any day in this position. So we've got more moves. Bishop coming to h5. That's interesting. Suddenly this bishop bounces around off the back cushion and wants to menace these queenside pawns. So the knight covering the square here. And bishop d1. And rook a3 and king d7. What's also very interesting, the king coming around to the queen side to cover the d6 pawn, but also perhaps in future covering the b6 pawn as well in case it's under fire. So that means this idea I was mentioned earlier, that it frees the black rook to come over to the king side and try to make this pawn break to release this past h pawn. So I like Morozevich's position here. I like his strategy. So it's gone knight a7. Okay, perhaps this knight can look at the bishop, and rook e8. So in fact, in this position, there are a lot of pawns for white to take care of. That a pawn, I mean, this is somehow a degrading position for the rook on a3. This is not what a powerful rook wants to be doing, consigned to just protecting this miserable pawn on a4. And in the meantime, black is building up pressure on the e-pawn. So rook d3. Ah, interesting. If bishop takes pawn, then b3 wins the bishop. So the bishops come back. And rook b3. So Navarro trying to make it as difficult as possible for black to achieve the perfect position, the perfect break. But watch out for that e-pawn. It may not be necessary to break with g4. Perhaps there's going to be enough firepower here. Let's see. The king has come across to c7, covering the c7 pawn. I think this is going to be very difficult for Navarro. He's down to a minute and 20 seconds. Morozevich down to a minute and just over a minute and a half. Very tight on time for both of them. Let's switch over to the other game. So Hari Krishna against Yannick Peltier. Let's see how they're doing there. Again, running short on time. Hari Krishna definitely better here. Haven't got time to go back through the moves, but, well, it's really, as I mentioned earlier, I think positionally white is better here because this is a weak pawn. Black's king finding it difficult to get into the game here. You can see those entry squares are covered. White needs some bit of time to bring the king forward. We've got more moves. c3 and the bishop coming back, and the first pawn has fallen. So Hari Krishna looking good here. Ah, a4. Also under fire, but bishop b4, I see. That's a good move, because now if knight takes pawn, then knight f6 check will actually win not just the e-pawn, but actually that pawn there. So it's gone f5. And things going from bad to worse. Knight c7 check. Yannick Peltier looks like he's in desperate trouble here. That's pawn number 2. Pawn number 2 has gone, and this should be technically winning position here. They're flashing through the moves on the board. e3 just been played. Yannick down to 15 seconds, but this is a relatively easy position for Hari Krishna to play. He's got 45 seconds. No, excuse me, over a minute. Now, remember, 5 seconds gets added per move they make. Should be a relatively simple technical win. Let's cut back to the other game, which is more in the balance. So just let me find that. Navara Morozevich. So Navara has closed off the queen side, so rook can't come to b3, but it does mean the a4 pawn isn't under fire, but those bishops look extremely nasty. I wonder, is bishop g6 about to happen? And then e4 could fall. Let's have a look. I wonder if he's going to try and construct some kind of fortress. Clock times, crucial at this stage. 15 seconds only remaining for Navara. Over 50 seconds for Morozevich, but somehow I don't trust Navara's position. I think those bishops look fantastic, and it's gone. Rook ef1 and bishop e2. I just wonder whether there's a way that Navara can maybe give up one of the rooks for the bishop and construct some kind of blockade, but you need the king to come here, really. Let's see, we've got more moves. f6 is dropping. Rook takes f6. So, position has clarified to some extent. So, Morozevich has an extra pawn, but the rook and the knight don't look too bad. Suddenly, there is a bit of counterplay at the other end of the board. Can he play g4? He's played g4. He's going for it. So after takes, then h3, and that pawn is looking to rush through. Well, I don't think there's any doubt. Morozevich looking good here. This has been a tremendous game. So he took now h3. Now there's a threat to play here. I think he's got to play rook f1. I can't see another move. I think he's got to go passive, but this must be better for black. Yep, he's played rook f1. So for the moment, there's no way through. That king can live on h1 and the pawn can't come through. But, for example, this pawn is weak and that rook has to remain passive on the first rank. So this is definitely better position for black, but he's got to... Morozevich has to watch that pawn running down the board because the king will not be able to cross over because the rook controls the f-file. So maybe he hasn't got time to grab that pawn. Let's see. It's gone. Rook f1, bishop h4. Aha, that's stopping the g-pawn advancing. And now rook f3. Hitting the pawn, defending this pawn. Rook g2 check. What's going on there? Who's better and why? I think it should be a draw now. Because if the king comes back here, then the rook won't be able to take a pawn. Should be a draw. No. Well, let's see. It's gone bishop g7. It looks to me as though Navara has won on time, which would be amazing. Incredible defensive performance. We'll try to get confirmation of that result. Incredible. And in the other game, Hari Krishna did indeed defeat Yannick Pelletier. Well, that was an extraordinary game. Okay, no surprise in Hari Krishna against Pelletier, but let me try and get confirmation of Navarra against Morozevich. I think he won on time, but it kind of looks like a draw. To me, that last position looks like a draw. So I want to find out what happened. Hopefully, I'm going to be told by someone fairly soon. The final position looks like a clear draw to me. Let's just go to that. So that is the final position. There's 1-0 is stated here on my board, but it looks to me as though that bishop move blocks out the rook. Should be a draw. But let's see if I can get someone to tell me. They're playing, I should say they're playing upstairs. We're playing in the Congress House in Biel. So it's a wonderful building, incredible auditorium. That's where they're playing upstairs. I'm here with the home crowd in front of me, watching this. So I'll get confirmation in a second. And I should say that this is just the first game of a 2-game mini-match. So that second game will actually take place in a few minutes as well. So hopefully by the time that one starts, I'll be able to give you confirmation of this result. 1-0 looks like a strange result to me, but maybe Morozevich lost on time. It looks like a draw to me, but I will give you confirmation in a second. Excuse me? Navarra won. There we go. I've got confirmation that David Navarra did, in fact, win on time. Morozevich have been pressing the whole way in the whole game, so incredible turnaround at the end. So, do join me in a few minutes for the second game of this mini-match. Quick confirmation of the results. Pentala Hari Krishna defeated Yannick Pelletier in that first game, and David Navarra beat Alexander Morozevich. 1 game to go in these semi-finals. See you soon.